Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And our topics for tonight are accumulating contradictions. I know that's a little mysterious, but when we get to it, you'll recognize it immediately. And then there's Crypto Strikes Again. Oh, I'm being joined by D. Amazing. I will add D immediately.
Hello, Joe. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, D. How are you doing? And
Oh,
welcome, by the way.
thank you. Yeah, I figured I'd join you tonight. I saw what you're going to be talking about, and I know I'm just shaking my head. His Trump's appointments, bad
And
news. He's angered his MAGA crowd. He's got the MAGA folks angry, so not good.
it's just a really further indication that he doesn't know what he's doing.
Hmm.
He doesn't have the faintest idea of what he's doing, would appear. But anyway, we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
Of course, he hasn't selected anybody for the Defense Department yet, has he?
I think there was some. I haven't seen it, but I heard some talk. So
And what did the talk say?
I'd have to. I didn't get a chance to look at it. I just saw it going across my screen, and I haven't had a chance really to look at it. I was just annoyed at some of the other appointments that he's got.
Okay, I was annoyed at that too, but the Defense Department pick is very, very critical.
Okay, which one? Here's the sense. Did you see the Secretary of Defense?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. The Secretary of Defense. Does he have someone there
Oh
yet?
God, it's horrid. It's horrid, horrid, horrid.
Who is it?
It's the guy's last name is Hegseth. He is a Fox News reporter.
It's what? What is it?
Hegseth, Hegseth. He grew up an evangelical Christian and credits his time in the U.S. military as a driving home for him the importance for Israel and the U.S. Relationship. I was just reading a paragraph of it. Yeah, his last name is. I'm trying to think of what his first name is. It just says something Hegseth.
Yes,
Fox News. Pete. Trump says he will nominate Fox News host Pete Hegseth for defense secretary.
he's taken leave of his senses. Does he have any military experience?
Yes, he has military experience. Yes.
What kind of military experience does he have?
Let me see.
A Fox News reporter named Hegseth?
Yes. Um, he's just a complete nut. Everything I've read here, he just.
Is
I see.
Trump a complete nut or Hegseth a complete nut?
Hegseth.
Or both.
Both. No, I lost my. Yeah, Hegseth has here. Let me see. U.S. Pete is tough, smart, and a true believer in America first, Trump said in a statement. With Pete at the helm, America's enemies are on notice. Our military will be great again, and America will never back down. Hegseth, most known for the appearance on Fox News, has called the two-state solution, quote, lip service and effectively dead. He notably.
Oh, so in other words, the position of Trump is going to be that there has to be a one state solution for Palestine, and that solution is going to be the Jewish state.
I guess so. He's
That's what he's
just.
signaling. I mean, if he's saying something like that, he must be signaling that.
That's what he's. Yeah. It
And
has.
he's
Yeah.
signaling that without first being briefed by the Defense Department and finding out what kind of capability deficit the United States had.
This guy's
What's
just.
going on here?
I don't understand it. I mean, this is totally stupid. And it says the guy that Hegseth, he notably praised the Biden administration on TV. However, for, quote, things like recognizing Jerusalem as the capital and others in the Abraham Accords, Trump administration accomplish seems to be at least rhetorical continuing for the Biden administration. Then it says he added that, quote, I'm heartened to see, at least from this president, at this moment, the continuation of the bipartisan consensus of support for the state of Israel. This is just crazy.
Okay, so I put in all of the links for you, just about getting the last one. So you could see, so you can put them up on your system.
Okay.
Which one are you interested in doing first?
Okay. Let me see. I guess I'll take Mondo Weiss.
Okay, Mondo Vice it is.
And he selected also Huckabee for a position. I mean, he's got all these. Yeah, ambassador to Israel is Huckabee.
Is it Michael Huckabee or Sarah Huckabee Sanders?
Mike.
Mike Huckabee, the evangelical.
Yeah, a lot of these Christian Zionists. Yeah, these Zionists.
To be the ambassador to Israel. And the Secretary of State, of course, is the person that has been groomed for the presidency by none other than Adelson, Miriam Adelson.
Yeah.
It's a payoff for Adelson's $100
Money.
million donation to the campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a naked payoff.
Yes, it is.
Marco Rubio.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Let me get that. Let me get that up. Yeah, it's just, and he's the MAGA crowd. The MAGA folks are angered because they wanted peace, and you have the JFK Jr. supporters wanting peace, and this is just not good.
not only is it not good,
It's scary.
it is ridiculous. I mean, it's the most stupid thing I think Trump has ever done.
I know.
I mean, specifically the Defense Department appointment.
Hmm.
He hasn't had any briefings from the Defense Department yet about what our capabilities are in the Middle East. I mean, how can he select somebody who's going to advocate for a one-state solution? That's going to be ridiculous.
It is. I'm trying to find it.
It's not only ridiculous, it's going to get us into World War III.
Oh, it is. And what it does right now, it's kind of like provocation. It's provocation when it comes to
I think you mean it's provocation.
provocation. Yeah, when it comes to Israel, Israel. When it comes to like Iran and the region, seeing.
When it comes to Iran, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to China.
Yeah, they're
I mean,
seeing.
it's provocation against all three.
Yes, it is, and it's clearly saying we want war. Wait a second, I'm having a hard time getting this up. I'm coming. Let me see.
Okay. Or they will certainly take it in that way. I have it up on the screen.
Yeah. You were good the other night.
Were you talking to Colby or to me?
I'm talking to the. I'm talking to. Well, actually, it's another one here. Okay. Amy.
Oh, Amy. It's Amy.
Yeah, she's a little Amy Sue. Okay. The role of the Gaza genocide in Kamala Harris's loss. The cause of Kamala Harris's disastrous failure in the 2024 presidential election will be forever debated. But there are good reasons to believe the Israeli genocide in Gaza played a significant role. Right. And, they expected Biden to be different.
Yeah, this one is by Mitchell Plitnick.
Yes.
on November 9th, 2024.
Why did Kamala Harris lose the 2024 presidential election? There is no shortage of answers to this question, most of them self-affirming and offered up to serve whatever agenda the pundit in question is trying to advance. That is certainly what you're seeing now on CNN and MSNBC. Voters who want something better in future elections than the awful choice we had this year must try to be more honest. But that honesty should not be false modesty either. We need to accurately assess our strength and power, not overstate nor understate it. The question of the United States Middle East policy is not a simple one. There can be no doubt that Mideast policy, especially regarding the genocide in Gaza, played a profound role in this campaign. But can we say that Harris lost this race because of Gaza? Disappearing votes. The most telling fact in this race is the drop in voter turnout. Trump is currently about 700,000 votes short of his 2020 tally, and when the smoke clears, he is likely to be around the 74.2 million votes he got 4 years ago.
Okay, so let us stop there for a second and simply contemplate that. Right now, he's 700,000 votes short of his 2020 tally. He is likely to get the same number of votes he got 4 years ago.
Right.
That means Trump did not get any more popular than he was 4 years ago.
Right, and that includes pretty much, it's like we said, you'd have to look at, in 4 years, there was a lot of people died, but then you got 4 years of new voters, and I'm sure that some of these, ones that voted for him probably grew up in, these conservative homes or Fox News homes or
Okay,
whatever.
but the point is the idea that he somehow got more popular with the American people,
No, he didn't.
collective, is false.
It is
That's
false.
what happened in this particular election.
No, it didn't.
What happened is described in the next paragraph, so go ahead.
But Harris, as compared to Joe Biden in 2020, is a different story. She currently has just over 69 million votes. That number may grow a bit when the counting is done, but it is going to be well short of Biden's 81.2 million votes in 2020.
Right. So how many votes is that right now compared to Biden? 12.2 million votes short compared
Yes.
to Biden. So Harris in this campaign was 12.2 million votes less popular than Biden was in 2020.
Right. And you'd have to also look at it this way, too, is the fact in 2020, people were fed up with Trump, and it was kind of like, oh my God, so people were more energized. But now the fact is, I mean, they went through 4 years of Biden, and then you look at Gaza, and then also, like we've talked on other shows, promises Biden made and he didn't deliver on. So,
Right, and failed to keep. But the basic fact is that she was 12.2 million votes less popular than Biden was in 2020, where Trump was not quite as popular as he was, okay, in 2020. But when the final vote is in, we'll probably see that he was just as popular as he was, okay, in 2020. But
right.
the story of this campaign was not that he became far more popular.
No, we didn't. It was just people were disgusted, you know, and
With
they
the
didn't show up.
administration. Uh, I'm sorry, with the Biden administration. Okay, and they were also disgusted with Harris as a representative of the Biden administration, and that disgust can be measured by 12.2 million votes.
Exactly.
I'll go on to the next paragraph, please.
Right, and people were disgusted with the DNC, and there were just a lot of issues they were disgusted with. Um, where did the votes go? Not to the Green Party, which only increased its tally by about 300,000 votes. No, those were voters who didn't vote in the presidential race at all. Donald Trump is the first Republican to win the popular vote since 2004 and the first non incumbent to do so since 1988. That's despite the very real threat of authoritarianism he brings, his history of sexual assault, his dozens of felony convictions for corruption, and all the debacles of his prior presidency that are too numerous to list here.
Okay, that is all true, of course, but the facts but still remains that he was no more popular than he was in
No,
2020.
no, he wasn't.
So,
And
so he did not win. Harris lost.
exactly. So, was it because of Gaza? Many academic articles and books will doubtless be written about the 2024 election. Theories will emerge, but the cause of Harris's disastrous failure will forever be debated. Still, there are good reason to believe the Middle East in general, and Gaza in particular, played a significant role. When voter turnout is this depressed, it is not due to apathy, but to disillusionment. This lack of turnout for Harris doesn't mean people don't recognize the threat Trump represents. It means they don't see Harris as the right answer, and they resent being forced to choose not just the lesser evil, but a candidate so distasteful that voting for her is inconceivable, even if the alternative is worse.
I think that's a good paragraph. This lack of turnout for Harris doesn't mean people don't recognize the threat Trump represents. It means they don't see Harris as the right answer.
Exactly.
And they resent being forced to choose not just the lesser evil, but a candidate so distasteful that voting for her is inconceivable, even if the alternative is worse. So let me add there at this point, wasn't that the situation in 2016 also? I mean, Trump was then considered to be an authoritarian threat. That case was made against him in spades. But isn't it true that they didn't see Hillary Clinton as the right answer? And they resented being forced to choose not just the lesser evil, but a candidate so distasteful that voting for her is inconceivable, even if the alternative is worse. Wasn't that true of Hillary Clinton in 2016 as well?
Yes, it was, and people saw what the DNC did to Bernie.
And in 2016, they did see it.
Yes, they saw what they did to Bernie, and people were furious. They didn't want Hillary; they wanted Bernie.
Yes, that's right. Okay, please go on.
Right, and then this time around too, there was no primary. They just throw people they want you to vote for.
Yes, it was so outrageous. Uh, they rigged the primary this time by not having a real primary.
Exactly.
Basically, by rigging who could compete, they let two people in, but those two people were very weak candidates. I'm speaking of Williamson and uh, uh, what's the guy's name from Minnesota? Uh,
Oh, let me think.
okay, anyway, it was the two of them who came in, and the primaries were rigged So they couldn't get any appreciable number of votes
Right.
against Biden. There were many primaries that were canceled, were not even held, and there were primaries that Biden didn't bother to participate in.
Mm-hmm.
And the DNC just rigged that whole schedule so it wasn't possible for Williamson and the Minnesota congressman. I don't know why his name is escaping me right. That's right on tip of my tongue. But anyway, neither of them could get up ahead of steam.
No.
They didn't have the money to do so, and they didn't have the number of primaries to compete in because primaries were getting canceled left and right. Uh, so Biden would not be strained to compete. So he wouldn't have to make any public appearances because everybody knew that from a cognitive standpoint he was lacking and he wouldn't be able to debate and he wouldn't be able to compete. So they rigged it for him. And people were certainly pissed off about that.
Yeah, people are furious with the DNC with their antics.
Yes. Okay,
Okay.
moving on, please.
There's more than one issue that reflects how terrible a candidate Harris is and how downright horrible her campaign was. These include immigration, the economy, in quotes, where she repeatedly told people struggling to pay their rent how good they have it in this, quote, Bidenomics paradise, really. Her embrace of war criminal Dick Cheney and his daughter Liz, and other points. We also must not discount the effect misogyny and racism might have had on some voters. But no factor was so stark as Gaza and the approach to Israel. That doesn't necessarily mean Gaza was the decisive factor. Indeed, no single factor was decisive, and several had they been different, might have led to a different outcome. But Gaza became a symbol for all of them. Harris made it clear from the outset that she had no intention of moving away from Biden's genocidal policies in Gaza. The team kept filling social and mainstream media with whispers suggesting she was really trying behind the scenes to modify those policies. In public, she didn't just double down on the policies, she used Biden's talking points, often even quoting Biden's or Antony Blinken's common lines verbatim. While the bipartisan Washington foreign policy blob largely backed all out support for Israel, Democratic voters wanted a ceasefire and certainly wanted the United States to stop supporting the devastation in Gaza. That disconnect was at least as important as objections to the policy itself. Voters are nervous about the Mideast conflict. They are worried about it spreading, drawing the U.S. in, and possibly then also involving other major powers in NATO, Russia, and China, giving them two wars that are scaring them. The possibility of confrontation with China over Taiwan only adds fuel to the fire, and the Democrats have shown themselves to be a warmongering party. When people protested the continuing support for Israel's genocide, Harris's response was, quote, "I'm speaking." It's hard to imagine that a better example of Democrats showing themselves as self-important, uncaring, and entitled than that response. In effect, Harris told everyone who cares about Palestine to just shut up about genocide and defer to her.
And I think in that context, we have when they were campaigning, okay, in Michigan, and when they were campaigning at the convention, they were confronting people in both of those places who had family, okay, in Gaza
Mm-hmm.
and who had lost family in Gaza. whose relatives had been killed by the Israelis, and they protest. And her response is, I'm speaking,
Right, that's callous and cold.
as if to say, don't be rude to me. Okay, I'm speaking. When their family members had been killed
Yeah.
and other family members were being threatened
Mm-hmm.
because of the continuing genocide that was going on there. But somehow her speaking was more important than her expressing empathy for their situation
Mm-hmm.
and saying the obvious.
Right.
Okay? And the obvious is we, the United States of America, cannot be, should not be party to a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
That is just something not acceptable for this nation, given our supposed ideals and given our own participation in making genocide an international war crime. We did that.
Yeah.
Earlier generations of Americans did. The people who came out of World War II and who sacrificed so much in World War II did that. And this generation is now not only saying it doesn't matter, what earlier generations did doesn't matter, but we are saying, oh, go right ahead, Israel, complete the genocide.
Yeah. Unbelievable. And that is horrific. And her only concern came about one day, October 7th.
Yes, it was only about October 7th, and her most sympathetic reply to the situation came just a few days before the end of the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, she gave a very, very weak response.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the only thing in American history like that was Hubert Humphrey's failure to part um, uh, uh, company with Lyndon Johnson when he was running for the presidency in 1968. But even Humphrey parted company with Johnson at the end of September of that year.
Mm-hmm.
And Harris never parted company with Biden, even right up to the last day,
Right.
okay, and the last hour. He decided it was more important not to offend Biden than it was to speak of justice for the Palestinians.
Right.
That was truly awful.
It was. It was. Harris undermined her own appeal. Harris's consistent defense of genocide undermined the messages she was trying to win with. Harris's main campaign point was how awful Donald Trump is going to be. She's not wrong. Even when it comes to Middle East policy. But it's meaningless. It's a meaningless argument when the ostensibly, quote, lesser evil is a full partner in the most brutal, sadistic, and massive genocide of the 21st century. That's a lesser evil that is too awful to support. Harris's policy strengths were women's rights and LGBTQIA rights. The latter was downplayed throughout her campaign, even though Trump was going after sexual and gender minorities in the most hateful way imaginable. But her stance on women's rights, which was prominent throughout the campaign, was undermined by Harris's approach to Gaza. How people asked, can she legitimately argue for reproductive freedom, for the right for women to control their own bodies when she is supporting a military onslaught that has made it impossible for women to get pre-op postnatal care, to care for themselves while pregnant, or to care for newborn infants? Worse, how could she argue for women's rights when she was so enthusiastic about killing civilians in Gaza that she was depriving women of the most basic right, the right to. Harris tried to sell a, quote, campaign of joy, contrasting it with Trump's campaign of grievance and hate. For the sycophantic, quote, blue no matter who crowd, this might have been effective. But for the voters she was trying to win over, Harris's message was tone deaf. Where was the joy in Palestine? How can we claim to rejoice in our politics when the politicians we are supposed to be backing is a full partner in genocide? This is unacceptable to anyone with a conscience.
I think that point is so important.
Yes, it is.
And many times during the campaign, thought, myself, how can this be a politics of joy
Yeah, how?
when the administration is supporting a genocide and is fully complicit in enabling that particular genocide?
Right.
How can we feel joy?
I have no idea. I have no idea. And then, talking about, women and equality, and we're seeing women being shot. We're seeing, like the article said, no prenatal, postnatal care. There's no milk to feed the babies. There's the water crisis where women, need plenty of water to breastfeed and they can't. I mean, it's a horrible situation. And like I said, how are we supposed to feel joy?
Okay, please continue.
Okay. But I thought voters don't vote based on foreign policy. Those of us who have made foreign policy our careers know very well that Americans rarely pay any attention to our foreign policy and never vote on that basis unless U.S. troops are being killed overseas in significant numbers, as they were in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam. Gaza and Palestine haven't precisely changed that. While Palestine solidarity activists certainly weighed Gaza and Lebanon very heavily in their voting, few people, relatively speaking, voted based solely on the genocide in Gaza. But because of the depth of American involvement, the horror of the brutal massacres Israel is committing on a daily basis, and crucially, the extent to which people can see the unfolding on their phones, Gaza became a symbol for the lack of substance among the Democrats and their manifest policy failures. The Democrats' response to the horror their own constituents have expressed at what we are doing in Gaza produced a revulsion that alienated many voters. Protests against the genocide have included much more visible participants and statements of support from national groups like the NAACP and trade unions. AIPAC has become the symbol of everything wrong with American politics, lobbying, and campaign financing. Kamala Harris's campaign completely missed this reality. The result was that her support among 18 to 29-year-olds dropped from Biden's 60% in 2020 to 55%, while Trump's support surged from 36% in 2020 to 42% this year, largely on the strength of how many voters in that age group simply didn't vote for either candidate. Everything about Harris's attitude toward Palestine and Palestinians contributed to a broader sense of hopelessness. Palestine solidarity activists could vote for Harris, but she sent the message that nothing would improve, even if they did. So they didn't.
So here I have to say something. Why was that feeling of hopelessness not wholly visible in terms of the campaign? We saw her events. There was a lot of enthusiasm expressed at those events. We know she got hundreds of thousands, okay, of volunteers who worked for her, and they knocked on door after door after door. We know that the campaign looked like a very successful and well-run campaign, and she and Tim Walz certainly successfully looked like the happy warriors they were supposed to be. So where is the evidence of the hopelessness? My answer to that is the evidence of the hopelessness is how many people stayed home. Of
Exactly.
course, you couldn't see them at the events because they had dropped out. That's why you couldn't see them at the events. That's why they weren't volunteering. That's why they were not going to the early votes. Now, some of the early vote analysts said, well, early voting is down this year. It's probably because people are reverting to their normal patterns after the pandemic. So they're not voting in the same numbers this year. The early voting is not up to what it was in 2020. That seemed sensible at the time, but that could have been due to the fact that those 12.2 million voters were going to stay home anyway.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
maybe the early voting was down by 4 or 5 or 6 million because those people never intended to vote at all because
Mm-hmm.
the choice was simply too much um, for them. And in light of the evidence from the fact that so many people stayed home, that now seems like a more plausible hypothesis than the one that says this was just a reestablishment of the older voting patterns.
No, it was people were angry. People were angry.
And they were
Um,
frustrated and they stayed home.
exactly.
Okay. The people who were able to suppress their anger or put aside their feelings over Gaza to support her were the people who were visible, who you could see in the crowds, uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, at the events. They were the people who volunteered for her. They were the people who expressed joy and enthusiasm for her.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the 12.2 million people who never voted were simply silent, so you couldn't observe them during the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably were not surveyed because the survey research wasn't asking the critical questions.
That's true.
Okay, please go on.
Gaza was the most visible issue that created the frustration and disillusionment with the Democrats that suppressed turnout in support of Kamala Harris. But it was not the only one. Democrats' draconian stance on immigration was another factor. The minimization of the struggle that people have making ends meet from month to month. When Democrats kept telling these people that they were too stupid to understand how good the economy really was. And burying the reality that it was still very bad for the majority of Americans was likely the single biggest factor.
And I have to say something here too. When people are thinking, are feeling that they have a bad economy, and they're expressing this in the survey research, that's being done, in the polling that's being done, and that is their perception. It is stupid to argue with what these people perceive by basically saying, "Oh, look at these statistics. Look at these, statistics that deny the reality that you are feeling." That, of course, in effect, is to tell people that they were too stupid to understand what their reality was really like, and please change their perceptions of that reality. But you can't change the perceptions of how people are feeling when they're failing to make ends meet, okay, from month to month.
Hmm.
I mean, the fact is that their experience is that they're failing to make ends meet because of the inflation.
Exactly.
You can see that.
Right.
They can see that in their failure to meet their budget, okay, from month
Exactly.
to month. Okay. And no amount of attempting to explain through charts and graphs is going to change their mind about that, because it denies their basic experience. When you try to deny the basic experience of people in campaigns, all you're doing is making people angry at you.
Right. Because, for example, you and Bonnie, when you go out shopping, you know the prices of things. You know, your neighborhood. You know the gas prices, the food prices, and everything you're experiencing. So, um, say for the Harris campaign to tell you something different, something that you too well know you're experiencing.
Yeah, I know that was infuriating for us. We know we're paying 30% more than we used to pay before the inflation. Now, the way I felt about it was that uh, Biden wasn't to blame for the supply chain problems. He wasn't to blame for the price gouging. So the
Right.
conclusion that we drew, well, it was Trump who was to blame for the supply chain problems, because he didn't anticipate the supply chain problems, okay, and do anything about them before the fact.
Right.
He was to blame for the price gouging because he always lets business do whatever the hell they want to do.
Exactly.
And he never does anything about that. So we blamed it on Trump. We did not blame it on Biden. But now that I think about it, okay, I know damn well Biden could have done something about it.
Yes, he could have.
Specifically, he could have acted against the price gouging much earlier, and he could have come out in favor of another stimulus check because the inflation was going on.
Exactly. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, those are two things he could have done, and they were things he failed to do because he is a neoliberal schmuck,
Exactly. He failed to help people during the time of crisis.
because he didn't care enough.
Okay, let me continue.
Okay,
Ga-
Gaza became a symbol
Yeah, Gaza became the symbol for all these failures. In no regard was Harris's unwillingness to listen to her constituents clearer. The 77% of Democrats who want a ceasefire also know the United States can get one by demanding it from Israel on pain of stopping the arms flow. Harris's gaslighting on this issue, claiming that they were, quote, working for a ceasefire, when it is quite clear they are unwilling to take any substantive action towards one, highlighted her shallowness on other issues. More than that, it highlighted a dearth of ethics and empathy for unimaginable suffering. that was supposed to be what differentiated her from Trump. Instead, Harris demonstrated that she was just as cynical and heartless as Trump is. She just wasn't going to be so open about it. Harris was unwilling to even pretend to care about people of Gaza or about the votes of Palestinians, Muslim, and Arab Americans.
Yeah, to comment on that, okay, I think it's a very good point, and there's a lot of evidence for it. Okay, but I also think that I did get something of a feeling, during the campaign. It could be I was projecting that, but I did get something of a feeling during the campaign that she was a better bet than Trump was to change policy towards Israel if she got in.
Hmm.
Okay, I won't say it was a, a big margin or it was obvious so that people should think of it. Okay, it's obvious. Okay, I don't think that's true, but I don't know. It was just a feeling I got.
Hmm.
I can't really base it on too much. Anyway, let's continue.
It would have been a simple matter to accommodate the uncommitted movement and have a moderate Palestinian speaker at the DNC. Some pro Israel groups might have objected, but it would have gone away quickly, and no one was going to cut off their donations, much less divert them to Republicans in response. But Harris said no.
Yeah, she probably got lots of consulting advice saying, no, no, don't do it. We'll lose the donations from the donors.
Mm.
Don't make any changes.
Harris was handed an opportunity by Biden's own Secretary of Defense and State when they issued their letter warning Israel to get into compliance with U.S. law. Of course, everyone knew it was a bluff, and Israel, rather than ignoring it, doubled down on its barring of food and humanitarian aid in Gaza. But Harris could have made a public statement supporting the statement and say that as president she would expect all countries to abide by these provisions of U.S. law. Most of us would be extremely skeptical of the truth of such a statement, but it would have at least have provided some hope that she might at least be a little better than Biden.
I thought that was another very good point by Plitnick.
Yeah. Harris wasn't interested in giving the slightest nod to progressives. She refused to even hint that there might be a reason to vote for her beyond her not being Trump when it comes to the Middle East. That refusal was a symbol for her failures on other issues that have personal renaissance for many American voters. So she didn't give the progressive votes that she had made no effort to secure, and she lost. Gaza was far from the only reason, but it was a meaningful part of the explanation, and it was emblematic of the train wreck of a campaign that left us with an authoritarian president that presents a danger to the whole world, to the entire world.
And we will see as we move through this program, the evidence of that danger gets stronger and stronger.
Right.
But before we do that, okay, I want now to move uh, to a more comprehensive analysis of why Harris failed. And okay, I'll take that article on. I picked this one up, okay, in LA Progressives. Why Trump won and consequences. Uh, the pundits and political strategists who forecasted the election wrong are now failing to understand its results as well. This is by Jack Rasmus, who's an economist, and who was part um, he was part of Jill Stein's shadow cabinet that she selected when she was running for president in 2016. Okay, Jack is a very good commentator. This was published on November 9th, 2024. There's a little cartoon there. Maybe we shouldn't have told them to eat cake. Woke stuff, in this cartoon. And a bunch of workers in the lower right-hand corner of the cartoon. So, he says in the article, it's now more than 48 hours after the election. The dust is settled. The results are in, except for late counting in the state of Arizona, the outcome of which won't affect but the results of the election. Trump has won an undeniable victory, both in the Electoral College and in the popular vote. Political pundits, pollsters, and overplayed political strategists who seem to get it wrong repeatedly every election cycle, now concocting all manner of explanations and mightily spinning their excuses. Some say Harris lost because the Democrats' ground game, i.e. get out the vote efforts, failed, or that the $1 billion in campaign contributions she received during the summer was ill spent, or her TV ads were poorly focused, or her politics of joy theme grated on the mood of voters who were anything but happy. But all these tactical explanations of the Democrats' devastating defeat, which was across the board, not just for Harris, are obviously irrelevant. The pundits and political strategists who forecasted the election wrong are now failing to understand its results as well. Here are the more important takeaways from the election. The next section is called the popular vote. A popular vote anomaly. The Electoral College result thus far, with Arizona's 11 votes pending, is 301 for Trump and 226 for Harris, with 270 that's needed to win. Of course, Arizona's 11 votes went to Trump, and he ended with 312 electoral votes, and Harris got 226. Trump also won the popular vote with 73.4 million versus 69.1 million for Harris. As of the popular vote count late November 8th, we already noted in the early article that his popular vote had gone up to 74.2 million. Perhaps the most glaring indicator of what went wrong for Harris, however, is the big shift in the popular vote away from Democrats. 2024 and 2020, Democrats polled 81 million votes in the presidential race. In 2024, so far only 69.1 million. That's 12 million fewer votes for Democrats. How do I explain that fact? So he's facing that now, and he's trying to explain it. These contrasting numbers raise two interesting questions. Where did Harris's missing 12 million popular votes go, if not to Trump? The corollary question also arises, did Biden and the Democrats really receive 81 million votes in 2020? Now, that's an interesting question. Whichever the explanation, the mainstream, the legacy media, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, WAPO, etc., are conspicuously avoiding any analysis of this missing 12 million or the apparent vote count anomaly. But one thing is irrefutable in the official vote tally. Roughly 13 million fewer turned out to vote for either candidate in 2024, and 12 million were Democratic voters. The only logical conclusion, therefore, is that 12 million Democratic voters apparently stayed home and did not vote. So why? Whatever the popular vote, it is irrelevant for presidential elections. Only the ancient Electoral College vote matters. Why the U.S. keeps that institution, which allows one person, one vote for all other voting for members of Congress, is interesting. 2/3 of voters have indicated in multiple surveys recently they want a direct vote for the president and an end to the Electoral College. Why both parties continue with the system says much. Nevertheless, it's a question. Like a Florida 100,000 election ballot Chad, quote unquote, that will be left hanging for now. But Electoral College vote repeat. Trump's 301, eventually 312. Electoral College votes confirmed this writer's prediction this past summer that the swing states would flip back to 2016 numbers, and Trump 2024 would be a 2016 swing states deja vu election. In the 2020 election, Biden's Electoral College vote was 306 to Trump's 232. In 2016, Trump won 304 Electoral College votes to Hillary Clinton's 227. The winning margins of 304 2016, then 306 2020, and now 301 or 312 in 2024 are not merely coincidental. The largely similar college counts in 2016, 2020, 2024 suggest strongly that deeper forces in the U.S. political system created a shift beginning in 2016 and have continued ever since. I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it. Trump's election in 2016 was therefore not the aberration as many Democrats in mainstream media argued in 2020. Biden's in 2020 was the aberration, that is. Events of the past decade suggest the fallout from the economic crash and crisis of 2008 to 2010 is still having its longer-term political impact. Voters' overwhelming concern with economic issues in 2024 reveals it is still reverberating. In 2024, it was manifested in inflation. In 2020, it was a massive COVID job loss. Since 2008, it's been the steady decline in real income and living standards for tens of millions of American households amidst the accelerating income and wealth for the 1% or 5% of households, largely attributable to accelerating financial asset markets and values. As one famous pundit said more than 3 decades ago, guess who that was? Quote, "It's the economy, stupid," unquote. Yeah, by the way, he just blasted, the Democrats today or yesterday, coming off of the "it's the economy, stupid." Here, Jack Erasmus says, one might clarify that, quote, "it's the lopsided economy, stupid," unquote. Economic conditions have deteriorated much further since the 1990s when that statement was made, especially after the 2008 to 10 crash and crisis followed by the COVID-induced crash. Some political elites apparently never learned the economic lesson. Yes, I remember that song. When will they ever learn? Where have all the flowers gone? When will they ever learn? That applies to the economy too, not just a war. Throughout this past summer, this writer has been predicting Trump would win the Electoral College vote by slightly more than 300, by 302 to 236 to be exact. This forecast was based on the assumption he would win all 7 swing states except for Michigan. In retrospect, he has won the latter state as well. Why the latter state? Well, certainly it was the Gaza issue that resulted in his loss, of Michigan. Inflation and other economic conditions during the Biden years were firmly established by opinion polls since the start of 2024 as the primary concerns of voters, therefore strongly confirmed again in the September Gallup poll. Put in a long-term perspective, Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton in 2016 and her loss of the blue wall states, quote unquote, in the North can be largely attributed to the weak GDP economic recovery after 2010 and the even weaker related job recovery during the Obama years. So, in other words, this is largely attributed to the weak performance of Obama with respect to the economic recovery after 2010. And why was Obama's economic recovery so poor after 2010? And I can tell you the answer to that, because he continually compromised with the GOP once they took over the House. He compromised in the context of debates over fiscal responsibility, and he always gave them parts of their cuts that they wanted to make in programs that were benefiting the population at large. He could have done other things other than compromise with them. When they got into debt ceiling crisis fights, he could have minted platinum coins to get through the debt ceiling crises. He did not do that because, as he said, he thought it was going to hurt the bond market. So he didn't want to do that. But why would it have hurt anything in the bond market? Because the platinum coins would only have facilitated paying back the debt as it fell due. So Obama just screwed up in compromising with the Republicans, and that was a big reason for the weak GDP economic recovery after 2010. But it wasn't the only reason for it. The other reason for the weak recovery dates back to before 2010, when he passed the Recovery Act in 2009. He and Larry Summers made the choice not to spend more than $1 trillion on the recovery bill. He was so popular in late January and early February of 2010 that he could have passed the kind of bill that his Council of Economic Advisors had recommended to him, a $1.8 trillion recovery bill. But he declined to do that. Instead, he passed an $800 billion recovery bill, which was inadequate and which made that recovery slower than it had to be. So it wasn't just his compromises with the Republicans, it was his pre-compromises with the Republicans and the austerity mongers in 2009 that caused the weak recovery that led to Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton in 2016. GDP grew around only 60% of normal after 2010 when compared to the prior 9 U.S. recessions since 2008. Yes, the Obama recovery was the longest recovery seen since the end of the Second World War. All the other recoveries were much faster, and this one was much slower because of the choices Obama made in his administration. More importantly, jobs lost after 2007 due to the 2008-9 crash did not recover to 2007 levels until 2015. It took 6 years just to get back to pre-recession job levels. After this, Hillary Clinton's well-known approval of free trade treaties and its offshoring of jobs effect, as well as her strategic error of not even bothering to campaign in the blue wall states, and the result was a predictable 2016 Trump sweep of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and victory. It was still, quote, the economy stupid. In 2020, Biden also largely won for economic reasons, specifically the severe recession and job losses of 2020 due to the COVID pandemic economy partial shutdown. Trump was blamed for that and for his treatment of COVID and for the deaths that resulted from the way Trump failed to meet the challenge of COVID. Biden swept back the blue wall states and won handily, almost exactly with the same electoral college votes that Trump had won with 4 years earlier. That stupid old economy had not gone away, says Jack Rasmus. 2024, the COVID-induced mass layoffs in 2020 no longer prevailed, but were replaced by another COVID-induced economic consequence, inflation, which erupted in the fall of 2021. Prices for goods started abating by 2023, but inflation in the much more ubiquitous services sector of the U.S. economy remained chronically high throughout 2023 and into early 2024. As we said before, Biden might have compensated that by fighting the price gouging and further by getting another stimulus check for people. And you may ask, well, uh, he didn't have control of Congress in 2023. No, he didn't. But as we know, the Democrats had control of Congress both in 2021 and in 2022. And if the justification for it had been inflation and compensating people for what they were losing in inflation, he might well have been able, if he campaigned hard for it, to get an extra stimulus check early in 2022. Why he did not do something like that in the run-up to the election of 2022 is political neglect. It's simply political malpractice that he at least did not try to do that. Official government statistics estimate the price level rose 24% over the 4 Biden years, but real inflation-adjusted take-home pay for tens of millions of households was impacted more severely than the statistics or politicians and media suggested during the recent election. Actually, inflation impact on family budgets was more like 30% to 35%. It was certainly on our budget, especially after considering the sharp rise in interest rates starting March to June 2023 and the rise in taxes. And we saw that, in our interest rates. The interest rates on our credit cards started shooting up, particularly in American Express credit cards. And that really hurt our household budget over a period of time. Neither of which are included in calculations of the government price statistics. That's completely true. Households also pay for interest out of their take-home pay and family disposable income. Mortgage rates rose 114% under Biden. Credit card average rates rose from 16% to 23%. There it is right there. Households carried over a record level of that debt monthly. New student loan rates rose from 4% to around 7%, and new auto loans from 4% to 9%. And that's not considering local taxes and fee hikes or problems with the methodologies and assumptions in government price calculations that tend to underestimate the actual rate of inflation. Households and voters knew what the real picture of affordability was the past 4 years, even if politicians, media, and mainstream economists did not. The background of the voting outcome since 2016 and longer-term economic causes raising the more immediate question, quote, why Harris lost in 2024. It certainly wasn't due to irrelevant tactical explanations, as the media and pundits now argue. And while jobs and inflation were the critical, even key, longer-term causes determining election outcomes in themselves, they still don't explain it all. There were strategic failures for Harris's defeat, nor indeed defeat for the Democratic Party in general, since its losses in November were across the board in both houses of Congress, governorships, and other local elections. In addition, Trump's strategy targeting disaffected males, mostly working class, and across racial lines proved effective in turn. Why Harris and Democrats lost? 1, failure to differentiate from Biden. High on the list of reasons why she lost must be a failure to differentiate her proposals from those of Biden, especially on economic issues. When directly asked in an interview during the campaign what she would change from Biden's policies, she replied, quote, nothing, unquote. That was perhaps the turning point of sorts in the campaign. Voters weren't looking for, quote, nothing new, unquote. They wanted economic change that directly affected their declining real take-home pay that had been slashed by 30 to 35% inflation since 2020. Harris this past week experienced what might be called the, quote, Hubert Humphrey, unquote, effect. In 1968, Democrat Lyndon B. Johnson decided not to run for re-election. His policy for escalating the war in Vietnam, combined with the inflection of the late 1960s, meant it likely would not win. His VP was Humphrey, who became the Democratic Party presidential candidate that year. But Humphrey would not break with Johnson's war policy, nor did he offer any answer to the rising inflation of the mid-1960s. War and inflation doomed his campaign in 1968, which he lost convincingly to Richard Nixon. No, he didn't lose it convincingly to Richard Nixon. I think that's a misnomer. He lost only by a relatively few thousands of votes. It was a campaign in which 60,000 votes had changed hands across a number of states. One of those campaigns, and Humphrey would have been the victor in the Electoral College. Nixon did not have a convincing win. I'm very well aware of that because I was very attuned to that campaign. It was only the third election, I've been able to vote, and I was furious with Humphrey for the whole campaign. I only relented and made a contribution to his campaign the very last week of the campaign. Okay, but and I so hated Nixon also, but I just couldn't bring myself to do anything for Humphrey because of his failure to divorce himself from Johnson's policies and to suggest anything new. Going on. Similarly, Harris's refusal to break from Biden war policies in 2024 or to offer any answer on how she'd lower prices for households played a big role in her defeat. I believe that's true. As I said in my previous analysis of what went wrong in the campaign, I emphasized she was offering very little to working class people, Black, Hispanic, and white. She was offering them very, very little to counteract this great impact of 30 to 35% on their household budgets that had occurred. This was an overwhelming impact, and she was offering almost nothing to counteract it. The Hubert-Humphrey effect should consequently be named the Humphrey-Harris effect. I'm all for that. That's a good idea. U.S. voters wanted to hear specifics on how the candidates proposed to reverse the decline in their living standards. Harris gave them mostly platitudes. The Democratic leaders may have removed Biden as their candidate over the summer, replacing him with Harris, but they left his policies intact because that's what the Democrats do, right? That's what they do. They ignore policies. They ignore issues. They always want to talk persons. Voters understood they were still voting for Biden, especially Democratic voters, as 12 million of them stayed home. I think Jack Rasmus makes a very compelling argument here. Some traditional Democratic constituencies jumped ship. Election data already show that many more Black male voters voted for Trump than in prior elections. So did Hispanic voters in key swing states like Pennsylvania. Even Puerto Rican voters who the mainstream media hyped would turn on Trump because of some comic in one of his rallies made disparaging remarks about Puerto Ricans, voted Trump in key constituencies. And there were the white suburban women who the Democrats bet would vote Democratic based on the reproductive and women's rights issues in key states like Pennsylvania. It appears they too voted by narrow margins for Trump. Identity politics themes no longer resonate, says Jack Rasmus. While all this may mean is that economic issues and questions of class trumped identity issues of gender, sexual orientation, and race on which Democrats had based their campaigns in recent years had become of secondary at best importance to voters. Polls like the Gallup poll were shouting this message all year, and especially in the latter months of the campaign. Democrat leaders were deaf, however. They apparently believed just changing the face of their candidate and throwing billions of dollars into the race this past summer would ensure re-election. It was another big strategic error. If Harris failed to differentiate herself from Biden, then the Democrat Party leadership kept her largely campaigning on issues of identity, gender, race, and sexual orientation. January 2021 is not the issue. A third related strategy failure was the Democrat elevation of the January 6, 2021 events and Trump's often out of context rally statements is a key issue. It wasn't. It ranked well down the list in almost all voter opinion polls. Just as in 2016, allegations that the Russians were interfering in the election and that Trump in their pocket had little influence on voters' choices. In 2024, voters didn't believe the charge that Trump was the destroyer of American democracy incarnate, a felon or closet fascist, or just didn't care, even if true, any more than they believed in 2015 Trump was the puppet of Putin. I was talking to somebody today in the building, and they still thought that Trump was the puppet of Putin. It was really something. Both the Democrats' pushing of identity issues and the personality attacks on Trump as either foreign agent or felonious fascist did not gain much traction. The economy was paramount in both 2016 and 2024, as it was in 2020, but Harris and the Democrats just couldn't let go of the old saws and themes that no longer worked and get focused on the economy. It's the economy stupid. It was beyond them. Okay, they ignored that. And the other thing they ignored was Bernie Sanders' platform of 2020. They rigged 2020, of course, so Bernie Sanders couldn't win. Okay, that was obvious. And even though they got away with it in 2020 because the economy was bad and people were looking for some improvement, okay, from Biden, how much more successful would they have been in 2020, both in the Senate and House races and in their own win, if they had campaigned on Bernie's platform in 2020, or if Bernie had been the choice in 2020. Would we be looking at Trump again today? No, I don't think so. Emerging electorate and party, the realignment. Another strategic reason why Harris and Democrats lost has to do with the shift in constituencies in the past decade. It's now clear that Trump has been able to start building a base in the working class, especially among young male voters. This is now being called the bros vote, but it's mostly young, non-college males who have been among the most disaffected segments of the voting population in recent decades. They are young, they are the millennials and Gen Zers who have experienced the most negative effects of low wages, housing unaffordability, low-paying jobs at which they must work 2 and sometimes 3 to get by, and other related issues. Democrats appear to have abandoned them as the party has drifted steadily away from the traditional working class since the 1990s. I think they've drifted away since the early 1980s and toward suburban women, LGBTQ voter constituencies, professionals, and college graduates. This is a cultural thing that sometimes gets expressed in elite slips of the tongue, like Hillary is calling them deplorables, quote unquote, in 2016, and Biden recently referring to them as Trump's, quote, garbage, unquote. Not all of Harris's losses are attributable to her failures or Democrat Party leaders' failures. Some of the losses explainable by Trump's own personal appeal, his policy initiatives during the campaign, and his political strategy in general. Trump talks and appears like they do. Part of Trump's appeal is evident when he speaks. He's crude, sometimes incoherent, makes off-the-wall statements, insults people he doesn't like, and embarrasses himself. In other words, he often sounds like them in their own everyday conversations. It makes him appear authentic to them. Democrats and their intellectual, educated supporters are often shocked by this behavior. They find it abhorrent. They're turned off by the crude working class, quote, banter, unquote, that is part of the normal communication for this constituency, but they live in a different cultural world in the bros constituency, as well as the working class blacks and Hispanics. The difference could be seen in Harris' rally speeches and even her final concession. It was all too perfect, not a missed phrase. straight from the teleprompter as if she's reading her comments, which of course she was. Too many platitudes, canned metaphors, and planned anecdotes. In other words, not natural or authentic. Trump's working class policy proposals. Overlaid on this class cultural divide is the fact that Trump appealed to working class voters with policy measures that should have been Democrats and often were in decades past, but no more. Trump proposed no taxes on tip income, which Harris quickly copied. He proposed no tax on overtime pay and to remove taxing of Social Security benefits, which Harris conspicuously did not copy. Trump's proposal for child care credits were more generous than Harris's. And his proposals on tariffs as a way to force corporations to relocate jobs back to the U.S. seem more convincing than Harris's, which was no different than Biden's, which was to shower grants of tens of billions on companies to bribe them to, quote, onshore, unquote, back to the U.S. Even Trump's immigration proposals were often stated as job creating, even if somewhat questionable in that effect. In short, Trump at least verbally turned towards working class voters in the election, while Harris and Democrats seemed to further champion suburban women and identity issues and push the worn out, hackneyed line, Trump is a Russian pawn and closet fascist who destroyed democracy, the country, and civilization itself. A widening generational divide, but for the tens of millions of new younger voters who came of voting age a decade ago, Democrats' leading election themes tying Trump to Russians and autocratic behavior are dead. Perhaps not dead, but dying as well are the various themes associated with identity politics. Identity issues will not go away, but they will no longer be predominant. The focus on identity does not resonate with the bros swing vote and has even become antagonistic, nor do they elicit the same tacit approval within the Hispanic and Black voting constituencies in a period when the economic stress for tens of millions of working class households is approaching a breaking point after decades. A quarter century later, it's still the economy stupid, quote unquote, in fact, more so than ever before. Some likely consequence, it's somewhat early to define what Trump will now do as president in his second term, but there are outlines from the campaign and his own issues focus in his statements. Most likely, initial actions will be associated with what he can do without congressional legislation by means of his own executive orders. At the top of his initial list will be executive orders related to illegal immigrants' deportations and rebuilding his border wall. EOs related to alternative energy matters and the environment will also take an early hit. Oil drilling permits are included in the latter action list. Deregulation in general will also appear early. Elon Musk will make recommendations cutting the regulations of government to save spending, and Trump will act more or less perfunctorily on Musk's recommendations. Much of that can be done via executive orders as well. The third idea is tariffs. Trump's promise to raise tariffs 10 to 60%. The latter on China imports will come quickly. It's not coincidental among his first appointments already is Robert Lighthizer as chair of the Trade Commission. Trump believes that an increase in government revenue from raising tariffs and a big cut to social program spending and deregulation will result in a major offset to U.S. budget deficits, which rose last year to $1.8 trillion, is currently running at a $2 trillion estimate for 2025. Tariff revenues, deregulation, even general austerity, social spending, program cuts coming in the spring by Congress will not even come close to cutting the deficit by $1 trillion. Which, by the way, is good because if they ever cut it by $1.8 trillion, that would result in a recession almost immediately. If they came close to cutting it by $1 trillion, that's going to result in a recession also, because the truth is the 1.8 trillion isn't even a big enough deficit for this economy because it doesn't make up for the trade deficit, okay, and it doesn't make up for savings desires among people in the economy. Going on. Trump believes the fiction that cutting business taxes further in 2025 will result in stimulating economic growth and thus tax revenues. He believed it when he cut taxes in 2018 by 4.5 trillion. It didn't have the effect on economic growth then. Continuing his 2018 tax cuts estimated by the Congressional Budget Office to cost the government $5 trillion over the next decade, and even adding to more cuts in 2025, will not even come close to resolving the fiscal crisis and economic train wreck that's the corner in 2020, around the corner in 2025 and after. But tax cutting will again be his and its Republican Congress's priority in 2025 nonetheless. That too will come this spring. Voters who put their hopes in a fundamental change in direction for the country voting for Trump and Republicans may be therefore disappointed. Not that that's anything new. The economy will therefore continue to be the number one issue for voters come the 2028 election. Dee, are you still there?
Yes, I had myself muted.
Okay, any comments on that?
All I can say is the DNC, the Democrats need to wake up. They need to go back to their base, and they need to actually live in reality. They've got to tour the country, really tour the country, and see how people are living and what is going on.
Yes, they have to tour the country, talking to people. They have to listen really good to how hard but life is for many people. And they have to formulate their platform for the next campaign in order to respond to people's concerns. And by God, they finally got to bring Bernie Sanders into the councils of power in a very public and very explicit way,
Mm-hmm.
because he is really the expert on listening to people and what they have in mind. I see Antonio Calhoun is here. Hi, Antonio. And Cora Emanuel is also here. A lot of mentions, of course, that the other candidate in the primary was Dean Phillips of Minnesota. Yes, that was. Cora Emanuel said Obama was more inspirational during his campaigns. Yes, he was inspirational, but he failed to deliver. He was a disaster, and he is terribly overrated. Even today, he is overrated. He has no right to the popularity that he has. And Cyril O'Reilly says household food costs increased 35% since 2020. Yeah, that's my experience, or approximately, but certainly between the household food costs and the interest costs, uh, costs increased by 35% since 2020.
Mm-hmm.
The Social Security COLA increases didn't begin to compensate for the rise in costs. Okay, that was a failure.
Right, and these are the issues that Democrats are supposed to be the ones that are connected with. They're supposed to connect with the people, have an understanding for the people.
Okay, so we've got three things left. I'm going to quickly go through one.
Okay.
I just want to point it up. Okay, I don't want to discuss it.
Okay.
It's going to take me 2 minutes. That is the article from Common Dreams on what the crypto billionaires did to Sherrod Brown, okay, in Ohio. Specifically, in the last few weeks, they turned that race, which had been not just an even race. Sherrod Brown was ahead by about 5 points or so. In the last weeks, the crypto industry intervened in that race, and they spent $40 million to defeat Sherrod Brown, the veteran senator um, uh, from Ohio. They simply drowned him in ads that were bought by the big money. And so he lost to a luxury car dealer by the name of Bernie Moreno. his campaign was boosted by around 40.1 million from the super PAC Defend American Jobs, which of course was not about defending American jobs at all. If anybody was going to defend American jobs, it was going to be Sherrod Brown, for sure, because he was a union guy from way back. Okay, anyway, okay, I just wanted to let you know about the 40.1 trillion because that is very, very important from the long term, for the long term theme about here, specifically, the Dump the Corruption campaign. That's another reason why we need to have the Dump the Corruption campaign. Overall, Crypto Group spent more than 130 million in support of candidates for federal office this cycle. A tracker created by the Stand with Crypto Alliance estimates that 263, quote, pro-crypto candidates, unquote, were elected to the House and 18 to the Senate in Tuesday's contest. That is amazing, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. And if you look at the influence of crypto and you look at the influence, okay, of APAC, and you look at the influence of Wall Street, uh, I mean, those three influences alone explain much of why Trump, okay, was able to win. So I started sharing this. I'm going to leave that now,
Okay.
okay, because we're running short of time compared to what we still have to cover. So we have two things left. Uh, I guess I want to end with a discussion of Trump's appointments.
Okay.
Okay, so what I think I want to do now is go over the West's uh, very fundamental accumulating contradictions. Uh,
Okay.
this is an article by Alistair Crook. He published on November 11th, 2024. I will. Oh, I didn't share this on Facebook uh, uh, going in. But did you happen to share it on
Yes.
Facebook?
Yes, I shared it and I shared it into groups as well, and then I also shared, the on X, the X platform one as well. I shared that.
Okay, so thank you. So I probably don't have to share it then.
Right.
Okay, because you've done it. I forgot to do that at the start. Which I normally do. Okay, anyway, I'm going to share now the Alistair Crook article, and we'll go through that because that's a very important piece. Uh, the West's very fundamental accumulating contradictions. He published this on November 11th, which was yesterday. November 11th, of course, is Armistice Day, using the old terminology for it. Of course, the new terminology is the Veterans Day. For some unexplained reason, that was not a school holiday here in Virginia. I have no idea why.
Hmm.
I mean, that's always been a big national holiday, but for some reason it wasn't observed here in Virginia, at least in the schools. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know whether the banks were closed or not. I didn't check that out. But the West doesn't have the financial clout to pursue global primacy if it ever did. Okay, that's the caption that's under a graphic. Uh, okay, it's a box for people to put their votes in, and it's sitting on top of a map of the United States. So I don't know why that's relevant to this article, but let's go on. The election has occurred. Trump will take office in January. Many of the existing party nomenclatura will be replaced. Different policies will be announced, but actually taking power rather than just sitting in the White House will be more complex. The U.S. has devolved into many disparate fiefdoms, almost princedoms, from the CIA to the Justice Department, and the regulatory agencies too have been implanted to preserve nomenclatura, hold on the system's lifeblood. The nomenclatura are the establishment people who inhabit all the agencies of government. They've also sometimes been called the deep state, I think. Pulling these ideological adversaries into new thinking will not proceed entirely smoothly. Well, that's the understatement of the year.
I know, right?
However, the U.S. election also has been a referendum on the prevalent Western intellectual mainstream, and that likely will be more decisive than the U.S. domestic vote, important though that is. The U.S. has shifted strategically away from the managerial techno oligarchy that took its grip in the 1970s. Today's shift is reflected across the U.S.
Hmm.
Back in 1970s, Zbig Brzezinski, who was to become National Security Advisor to President Carter, wrote a book foreseeing the new era, what he then called the technotronic era. Quote, involved the gradual appearance of a more controlled society, such a society dominated by the elite, unrestrained by traditional values, and practicing continuous surveillance over every citizen, together with uh, 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 the manipulation of the behavior and intellectual functioning of all people would become the new norm, unquote. Elsewhere, Brzezinski argued that that quote, the nation state has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation state, unquote. Brzezinski was plain wrong about the benefits of tech cosmopolitan governance, and he was decisively and disastrously wrong in the policy prescriptions that he adduced from the implosion of the Soviet Union in 1991, that no country or group of countries would ever dare to stand up to U.S. power. Brzezinski argued in the Grand Chessboard that Russia would have no choice but to submit to the expansion of NATO and to the geopolitical dictates of the United States. But Russia did not succumb, and as a result of the elite's 1991, quote, end of history, unquote, euphoria, the West launched war in Ukraine to prove its point that no single country could hope to stand against the combined weight of all NATO. They said that because they believed it. They believed in the Western um, 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 uh, manifest destiny. They did not understand the other options Russia had.
Hmm.
Today, the Ukraine war is lost. And by the way, we see this increasingly every day. The Ukrainians are about to be completely snuffed out. Okay, in Kursk now, Kursk is over. Okay, and of course, the Russians are on the move. Whether they're going to stop, at the Dnieper River or not, I cannot say. That's going to, be a decision point. I think that Putin is going to decide to go further and go for uh, Kharkov and Odessa and the oblasts in between as well. Uh, so I think that's going to happen. I don't think the Ukrainians can stop it. I think their army is in total disarray at this point. The quote, other war, unquote, in the Middle East fares no differently.
Hmm.
The Israeli US war on Iran will be lost, and tens of thousands of Palestinians and Lebanese will have died pointlessly. And the quote, forever wars, unquote, too, that were expected by the Supreme Commander of NATO in the wake of 9/11 to topple an array of states, first Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, also Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. Not only did they not result in consolidating U.S. Hegemony, but they have led instead to Kazan and to BRICS with its long tail of aspirant members ready to face down foreign colonialism. The Kazan summit was cautious. It didn't project a flush of solutions. Some BRIC states were hesitant. Okay, the U.S. election was scheduled for the following week. Putin's comments to these latter states were carefully calibrated. Look at what the U.S. can do to you should you fall foul of it at any point. Protect yourselves. All that the BRICS president Putin could say at this juncture was, here are the problems that we have to solve. It is premature to set up a full alternative Bretton Woods structure at this time, but we can set up the core to a prudent alternative for working in the dollar sphere. A settlement and clearing system, BRICS Clear, a reference a unit of account, a reinsurance structure, and the BRICS card, a retail payment card system similar to Alipay. Perhaps a reserve currency and the full Bretton Woods paraphernalia will prove unnecessary. Financial technology is evolving fast, and providing that the BRICS clearance system is functional, a multitude of fintech separate trade channels may ultimately be what results.
Mm-hmm.
But a, quote, weak, unquote, time in politics, unquote. And 1 week later, the Western intellectual paradigm was upended. The shibboleths the last 50 years were rejected across the board in the U.S. by voters. The ideology of, quote, undoing, unquote, the cultural past, the casting aside the lessons of history for, it is claimed, quote, wrongful, unquote, perspectives, and the rejection of systems of efforts reflected in the myths and stories of the community have themselves been rejected. It is okay again to be a, quote, civilizational state, unquote. The radical doubting and cynicism of the Anglosphere is reduced to one perspective amongst many and no longer can be the universal narrative. Well, post the U.S. election, BRICS sentiment must be turbocharged. Notions that were not thinkable last week just became possible and thinkable a week later. Historians may look back and observe that the future architecture of modern global finance, modern global economy, may have struggled to be born at Kazan, but is now a healthy infant. Will it all happen smoothly? Of course not. Differences between BRICS member and partner states will remain, but this week a window has opened. Fresh air has entered, and many will breathe more easily. If there is one thing that should be clear, a second Trump administration is unlikely to feel the need to launch a, quote, war on the world, unquote, to maintain its global hegemony, as the 2022 National Defense Strategy insists it should. At this point, I have to comment on that particular paragraph. I think up till now, this has been a brilliant article, but okay, I beg to differ on whether it's clear that a second Trump administration is unlikely to feel the need to launch a war on the world. The reason why I feel that way is personnel is policy. And as soon as we finish this particular blog post, we're going to move into a discussion of personnel. And we will see from that from the standpoint of personnel being policy, it doesn't look good about the Trump administration being unlikely to feel the need to launch a war on the world. But we will see this in a few minutes. So the U.S. today faces its own internal structural contradictions, going on with the article, to which Trump regularly alluded when he talked about the evaporated American real economy owing to the offshored manufacturing base. A recent report by the RAND organization states starkly, however, that the U.S. defense industrial base is unable to meet the equipment, technology, and munitions needs of the United States and its allies and partners. A protracted conflict, especially in multiple theaters, would require much greater capacity and a radically increased defense budget. Trump's industrial recuperation plan of painfully high tariffs by wringing American manufacturing, an end to federal profligacy, and lower taxes suggests, however, reversal into fiscal rectitude after decades of fiscal laxity and uncontrolled uh, borrowing, not uh, 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 military spending. Parenthetically, defense spending, by the way, during the Cold War relied on top marginal income tax rates above 70% and corporate tax rates averaging 50%, which does not seem to be in accord with what Trump has in mind. I think that's another understatement of the year.
Mm.
Professor Richard Wolff comments in a recent interview that the West as a whole is in deep trouble financially, precisely as a result of such unrestrained government expenditures. Quote, for the first time a couple of years ago, bondholders were unwilling to continue to fund the deficits of Great Britain, and the UK government was thrown out. Mr. Macron is now heading right down the same path. Bondholders have told the French that they are not going to continue to fund their national debt. I point out in the middle of this quote that this could happen in Great Britain because the British are stupid and won't use their capacity as a monetary sovereign. So they insist on funding their deficits by going to the bondholders when all they have to do is create the money uh, uh, that is what is used for deficit spending. That's how deficit spending can be funded. They don't have to do anything else to fund it. Okay, now the French are in a different position because they are in the EU and they cannot create their own funding, okay, as the British can. So the fact that they're headed right down the same path is very serious, okay, for the French. Alistair Crook goes on in this quote, though. Here's how it works. Bondholders are telling the French you have to rein in spending. The bondholders are saying you have to stop running deficits. And as every undergraduate knows, the way you rein in deficits would be to cut spending. But there is an alternative. It's called taxing. And it's called taxing corporations and the rich because others don't have any more for you to tax. You've done all you can do with taxes on ordinary French citizens. Well, of course, to comment on this part of the quote, this is true for France because France cannot create its own funds. It doesn't have the capacity because it's part of the EU to create the euros needed. This is not true of the UK, however, and it's not true of the US. Both of our countries are monetary sovereigns, and we can create as much money as we need to create without issuing any more debts. We can say, bondholders be damned.
Mm-hmm.
The French, however, cannot. However, going on with the quote, however, taxing corporations and the rich somehow is not only not doable, but debatable. It can't be put on the table, but nothing or something so minuscule that it will never deal with the deficit. We now have too much debt. And it turns out that the government, like the American government, is facing the next few years where it will have to spend as much on servicing its debt as it does on defense. That may be the case, okay, for the United States, but for the United States, it doesn't have to be a hardship because the Congress can simply require the Federal Reserve to place the necessary money in the Treasury spending account, okay, to service the debt. And if the Congress doesn't want to do it, then Trump himself can do it by causing the Treasury Secretary to order the director of the Mint to mint $100 trillion platinum coin, which will then uh, uh, the proceeds from which can be used to completely pay off the debt and to fund the deficit for many years to come. So it will have to spend as much on servicing the debt as it is on defense, and that doesn't leave very much for everybody else. And everybody else is saying no, 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 no. And now the bondholder gets worried because one way to resolve this would be to stop paying the bondholders. And that, of course, must never be. But as I just said before, you can always pay the bondholders if in the United States or Britain
Mm-hmm.
just cause the creation of the money for the Treasury, or the Exchequer in Britain to pay the bondholders when their bonds come due, to pay them the principal and the interest, when they come due. And so that's easy to do. But in the quote, that is not something envisioned. So it says, so you've got two absurdities. You can't stop paying the bondholders when, of course, you can, but with dire consequences. And you can't tax corporations and the rich. And of course you can. I think we're reaching a point in which these contradictions have accumulated. You don't have to be a Hegelian or a Marxist to understand these accumulating contradictions are very profound, very large, and very fundamental. But you do have to be, an MMT economist to understand that you don't have to provide money for the Treasury by taxing, or borrowing. In fact, in neither of these cases do you really provide any money for the Treasury. The new money for the Treasury is always created by the Federal Reserve, creating new money as you move through time. Hegelians or Marxists do not understand that. So the so-called accumulating contradictions Alistair talks about here are not contradictions that cannot be resolved here in the United States or in Canada or in the UK or in Australia or in New Zealand or in Japan or in any one of many nations that are monetarily sovereign. Unfortunately, this doesn't apply to the members of the EU who gave up their native currency a long time ago to go into the EU. A very foolish move on their part.
That's what I was going to say. A very stupid move.
Very stupid moves. So going on with the article, they tell us that on the one hand, that the world does not accept the Western vision as being of universal application. And on the other hand, the West doesn't have the financial clout to pursue global primacy if it ever did. Zugzwang. I think that's a German expression. I don't know what it means. Perhaps we ought to look it up. This article is generally a very good article by Alistair, with the exceptions I pointed out. It's republished from the Strategic Culture Foundation by permission of the author or representative. Now I want to focus on specifically that key statement that was made, by Alistair, that concerning if there is one thing that should be clear, a second Trump administration is unlikely to feel the need to launch a war on the world to maintain the global hegemony of the United States. I question that conclusion, and going to the next article, the final article that we'll cover tonight. Would you like to read that article, Dee?
Which article is that?
It's the one from Common Dreams. Okay, I'm going to put it up now.
Okay.
Trump expected to pick the rabid the neocon Marco Rubio,
Oh, yeah, he picked him.
otherwise known as Little Marco.
Okay. Okay, I'll read it from you, what you have up there.
Okay, good.
Uh,
I put in.
Okay, Trump expected to pick rabid neocon Marco Rubio for of state. Quote, Trump emerging national security team is shaping up to be a kettle of hawkish neocons, wrote
And what
journalist
the,
Jeremy Scahill.
what do
Oh,
hawkish neocons believe in? They believe in a war on the world.
exactly.
Okay, please go on.
Okay, President elect Donald Trump has reportedly decided to name Republican Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State, a move that would elevate to the status of top U.S. diplomat, one of the most reliable war hawks and interventionists in Congress. Rubio, Republican of Florida, whom Trump once attacked as a little puppet of the late pro Israel billionaire Sheldon Adelson,
Okay,
has.
here we have to add, right in the middle of the sentence, okay, we have to add that Trump just took $100 million loan from the widow of Sheldon Adelson, from
Mhm.
Miriam Adelson, for his campaign. And so, what was the price of that $100 million loan, which I assume Trump is never going to pay back? And I think the price of that was for Trump to appoint, said Marco Rubio
Mm.
to the position of Secretary of State. Okay, but please go on.
Yeah, and there was a lot of fury. I saw a lot of fury on X with that. Oh,
Yes.
okay. Oh, yeah. Has vocally backed Israel's war on Gaza Strip, agitated for a military confrontation with Iran, and encouraged a coup in Venezuela. The Florida senator is also a China hardliner, much like Trump's national security advisor pick, Representative Mike Waltz of Florida.
Okay, so notice there, Secretary of State is a neocon and war hawk,
Yep.
and his national security advisor, oh, and a China hardliner, much
Yeah.
like his national security advisor pick, specifically Mike Waltz.
Yep.
Okay,
And people are
Florida.
furious. The MAGA crowd is furious
So
at these
two
picks.
neocons and hardliners we mentioned so far.
Exactly.
Please
Okay,
keep
you got to
going.
move down. Yeah, you got to move down a bit. Okay. The New York Times, which first reported the Rubio selection late Monday, noted that Trump, quote, could still change his mind at the last minute.
Okay, let us pray for that.
The expected Rubio pick runs counter to Trump's attempt during the presidential campaign to posture as a, quote, candidate of peace, which is how Vice President elect J.D. Vance described Trump in the run up to last week's election. Yes, and the RFK Jr. people that, went with him, I mean, they're all furious. A lot of people are furious. Quote, Trump's emerging national security team is shaping up to be a kettle of hawkish neocons, wrote Drop Site's Jeremy Scahill, pointing out that Walt was a, quote, counter terrorism advisor to Iraq war architect Dick Cheney. Mm.
Now let's go on to the next paragraph.
Scahill went on to characterize Rubio and Representative Elise Stefanik, Republican of New York, Trump's pick to serve as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, as B-minus list neocon warmongers. And all these people have something in common too, is that they don't recognize Palestine.
Right. So we've got already three. warmongers at the top level, the ambassador to the United Nations, the Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisor.
Yes.
Let's go on.
Scahill's colleague Ryan Grimm called Trump's likely selection of Rubio as U.S. Secretary of State, quote, a huge win for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose attacks on Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Iran have plunged the Middle East into a regional war. Quote, Marco Rubio is a rabid neocon who, quote, never met a war he didn't want somebody else to fight, Grimm wrote on social media late Monday. With Republicans set to retake control of the Senate, Trump will likely face little difficulty confirming Rubio and other expected members of his cabinet. Despite this, Trump is pushing Senate Majority Leader hopefuls to commit to allowing recess appointments, which would enable Trump to install administration officials without confirmation from the upper chamber. Trump has yet to name his pick to lead the Pentagon, but his Secretary of State and National Security Advisor choices hardly indicate a break from a foreign policy establishment that has produced catastrophic wars costing millions of lives and trillions of dollars.
However, at the start of the show, D,
Hmm.
you told me that he has named his pick.
Yes.
So
The-
could you repeat what you said there?
okay, let me get that up over here. Yeah, the Fox News person. Let me get that up here.
The Fox News person with the strange name.
Yes, here it is. Pete Hegseth. And what Trump says, quote, Pete is a tough, smart, and true believer in America first. Yeah, right. Quote, with Pete at the helm, America's enemies are unnoticed. Our military will be great again. And America will never back down.
Okay, so who is this Pete?
Okay, Hegseth, most known for his appearances on Fox News, has called the two-state solution, quote, lip service and effectively dead. He noted he praised Biden on the okay, this has to do with he's all in for
He's all in for a one state solution.
yes, and here Hegseth grew up in an evangelical Christian and credit his time in the US military as driving home for him the importance of Israel and the US Israel relationship.
Okay, what was his career in the military like?
Um it doesn't really say too much. It just says, quote, after being in the military and having served in Iraq, I saw other views of the world and started to understand where Israel fits and where anti Semitism comes from, how it is fostered in higher education, and how lack of support for Israel is very indicative of other things, he told the Jewish press in 2016.
Okay, how do you spell his name?
Hegseth, let me see. Hegseth.
Okay. So
He
let
has, yeah,
Oh, he's a good looking man, isn't he?
everything's about looks, right?
Yeah. He's 44 years old. He was born in 1980. He is pictured uh, when you Google him as wearing a T-shirt with the flag on it and a "We the People" tattoo on uh, the lower part of his arm. He's an American. He's an Army National Guard officer. He went to Princeton, so he's Ivy League. Let's see if I can get some information on his military career here. Is he religious?
Yes, he is.
Does he live in Tennessee? How old is Pete on Fox and Friends? Oh, he's on Fox and Friends.
Okay.
Pete Hegseth. I guess you can tell I don't watch Fox.
I know I don't either, so.
Yes, so we're lacking education on just who this fellow is.
Oh, it said here Hegseth
He's a
criticized. What?
he's a Princeton and a Harvard graduate.
Okay.
Oh, Trump has named his new director of the CIA. He's a guy by the name of Radcliffe, John Radcliffe. He's a former four-term Texas congressman. Which is kind of interesting. I can't see the rest of this article because I am it has brought up a block on the article, but I refreshed it so I'll be able to see it for a little while.
Okay.
But why did it start talking about him? I mean, I'm glad it did. I didn't know that. He will be a fearless fighter for the constitutional rights of all Americans.
Yeah,
The
right.
president posted. uh, we still don't know anything about the military career of Hegseth. In other words, I'd like to know if he at least became a colonel. I mean, what is his qualification to be the Secretary of Defense?
I I don't see where he should be.
I mean, I don't see that being a host on Fox and Friends is a qualification for being Secretary of Defense.
No, it's not.
So we still have to find out something about that.
Who he is, yes.
Yes, who he is, but his thinking that you can only have a one-state solution in Israel implies that he is for ethnic cleansing. Okay,
Yeah.
because that's the only way you're going to get a one-state solution. Out of the Israelis. So if that's a justifiable conclusion, we have the following setup. For the Biden administration, Secretary of State is Tony Blinken, and we know what he stands for.
Yes.
National Security Advisor is Jake Sullivan, and we know what he stands for.
Mm-hmm.
Secretary of Defense, okay, is Lloyd Austin, and we know that Lloyd Austin has been holding the U.S. back from the war with Iran. He is the one who has been telling the president to be very cautious when it comes to, fighting Iran. In the current administration, he is a voice for peace. When we make the comparison little Marco is probably going to be just as bad as Tony Blinken is
Yeah.
when it comes to constraining, the Israelis. Okay, the comparison of Elise Stefanik to our current ambassador, uh, 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 whose name is Robinson. Okay, I forget what her last name is. Sorry, what her first name is. Certainly, there's no difference between she and Stefanik.
No, there isn't.
Okay, when it comes to national security advisor, there's no difference between Jake Sullivan and Michael Waltz, but there is a difference when it comes to Hegseth as Secretary of Defense as opposed to Austin. Because as far as I know, what Hegseth is for, based on what we just read, he's for a one-state solution, which the Iranians will never allow unless that
No.
state is a Palestinian state, which may or may not have any Jews in it. And I don't think that Hegseth, with that kind of orientation, is going to restrain Trump from having a war with Iran. And besides, what does Hegseth know right now about the capability of the U.S. Defense Department?
He doesn't know anything.
I doubt he's even read the report of the RAND organization about our shortfalls in capability. Certainly, if he's a host on Fox and Friends, I doubt that he will have read that. I mean, this is a travesty.
It is. Okay. In his book, Hegseth wrote that he had served under former President George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Trump. His unit was tasked to work the inauguration of Joe Biden as well on January 20th, 2021. Ultimately, members of my unit in leadership deemed that I was an extremist or a white nationalist because of a tattoo I have, which is a religious tattoo. Hegseth told Fox News during an interview promoting his book in June. Hegseth said the tattoo is a Jerusalem cross. On one day before Biden's inauguration, the National Guard Bureau said it had removed 12 soldiers from the inauguration duty following a security vetting process intended to ensure troops should not have any ties to extremist groups. CNN reported in 2019 that Hegseth, while working at Fox News, privately encouraged Trump to pardon some United States servicemen accused of war crimes. Trump went on to pardon 2 service members and restore the rank of Navy SEAL to Eddie Gallagher, who had been demoted. The controversial move went against the advice of then Defense Secretary Esper and other senior military leaders who had told Trump that a presidential pardon could potentially damage the integrity of the military judicial system.
Thank you. Okay. Alaska Republican Lisa Murkowski said, wow, on Tuesday evening, upon hearing he'd picked the Fox News host to lead the Pentagon. Senator Todd Young, a Republican of Indiana, I'm reading from CNN Politics,
Okay.
Who has been critical of Trump at times, said he wanted to learn more about the nominee. I guess we all want to learn more about the nominee, and what we're
Mm,
learning is not comforting.
no, it's not.
Uh, so there's a quote, I think this is from Todd Young,
Oh my God.
the senator from Indiana. The quote said, quote, I just don't know much about his background and his vision. I look forward to learning more. I want to give President Trump's nominees fair opportunity to state their qualifications and their vision.
It says here, this is CBS News, he previously served as head of Concerned Veterans for America, a group backed by conservative billionaires Charles and David Koch. Oh God, it gets worse every day, doesn't it?
So he never attained any military rank of note then.
Not that I'm seeing.
I mean, he certainly was never a colonel.
No.
So Trump could have appointed Colonel McGregor,
Yes.
and he passed over McGregor, who would have been truthful with him about the capabilities of the United States, in favor of this uh, person, Pete Hegseth.
Mm-hmm.
He has a long record in the military, serving in Afghanistan and Iraq. He has acted as an informal advisor to Trump for a number of years while he was in and out of office. He was considered for a number of positions in Trump's first administration, but he was ultimately passed over. But in Hegseth, he's likely to have a loyalist leading a department with which he had an often rocky relationship during his first term. The president-elect feuded with his first defense secretary, Mattis, who resigned in protest after Trump announced an immediate withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria. Esper, Trump's other confirmed defense secretary, had openly warned about the threat of another Trump administration in the weeks leading up to the election. Hegseth has criticized efforts to allow women into combat roles, accusing the military of lowering standards to allow women into those jobs. Speaking about his book, The War on Warriors, published this year, Hegseth said in a recent podcast he was surprised, quote, there hasn't been more blowback on the book because I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles, unquote. Hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated. We've all served with women and they're great, but our institutions don't have to incentivize that in places where traditionally, not traditionally over human history, men in those positions are more capable. Hegseth later added he took issue specifically with women in physical, labor-intensive, such as those with the Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Army Special Forces, Marine Special Operations, and jobs such as those in infantry, armor, and artillery units. I'm talking about something where strength is the differentiator, he said. Now, I guess what I have to say about that, if strength is the differentiator, then that's fine. Uh, then women should have to pass the tests of strengths, as should men. And then how they do on those tests of strength uh, should be a determining factor. But I'm sure there are women who, if they're in good shape, are pretty damn strong.
That's true.
Either you're in for war fighting and that's it. That's the only litmus test we cared about, he said. You've got to get DEI and CRT out of the military academy so you're not training in officers to be baptized in this type of thinking. This is really a political appointment, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the capabilities of the defense secretary to head up, 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 up the Department of Defense.
Right. Here, here, quote, the job of Secretary of Defense should not be an entry-level position, Representative Adam Smith, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, said on X, which he's right, it shouldn't be an entry-level position.
Yes, he's absolutely right. Well, Hegseth does hold two bronze stars, so he was evidently very effective in combat uh, himself. Okay, it doesn't say what rank he held.
Now they're saying could set a collision course between Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General C.Q. Brown, a former fighter pilot with command experience in the Pacific and Middle East, who Hegseth accused of, quote, pursuing the radical positions of left-wing politicians.
Oh, this is going to be something. This is going to be a real politicization of the Defense Department.
Hmm.
CNN reported in 2019 that Hegseth, while working at Fox News, privately encouraged Trump to pardon some United States servicemen who were accused of war crimes. Trump went on to pardon two service members and restore the rank of Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher, who had been demoted. The controversial move went against the advice of then Defense Secretary Esper and other senior military leaders who had told Trump that a presidential pardon could potentially damage the integrity of the military judicial system.
This is not good.
Yeah, I think we can summarize by saying that uh, the initial picks of Trump do not give us confidence that he would pursue the supposed policy goals or goal of being a peace president. It doesn't look like these personnel picks are in support of his policy of becoming a peace president. I think we can very fairly say that based on on what we've read here.
Yeah, he's got major problems. He really does. Here's something, a quote he said to the guy Brown. It says, Hegseth also took aim at Brown in particular, asking whether he would have gotten the job if he were not black. Quote, was it because of his skin color or his skill? We'll never know, but always doubt, which is on its face seems unfair to CQ. But since he has made the race card one of his biggest calling cards, it doesn't really much matter, he wrote.
Right, but who is this guy who has made the race card one of his biggest calling cards?
It says, let me see, Brown. Let me go back here. I think I spoke about it before. Yeah, he's going to, he has this issue, and Trump is going along with it, with getting rid of woke people. So it's racism.
Right, but he was talking about a particular person, right? So
Yes, this guy Brown. I'm trying to see why he says Brown when I'm trying to see where up further. It didn't say anything. Let me see. Yeah, because he was going after somebody in the chief of staff, whatever. Let me see. I don't know. It's in Reuters. There's this rant going on. Okay. Oh, here's a skin color. Okay, Trump's former U.S. generals and defense secretaries among his fiercest critics, with some declaring him unfit for office. Trump has suggested that his former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, could be executed for treason. Hegseth also slammed Milley for failing to execute Trump's policies dutifully when in office and accusing him of being a partisan to the end to aid Democrats. I'm trying to get back to find out who this Brown is.
Yes. Okay, while you do that, I'm going to take a look at some comments. So Manadel says, Ukraine has been our puppet. So sad. Yes, indeed, it's so sad. And they lost 600,000 people being our puppet, 600,000 soldiers. That doesn't count any civilian casualties. But do you think Vance is influencing Trump's staff decisions? I don't know. So far, the staff decisions seem to me to be decisions of the kind that Trump himself would make. Okay, I don't see any evidence of the fine hand of J.D. Vance in those particular decisions. I mean, certainly the Hegseth decision is the kind of way out sort of decision that would be made.
Okay, here. This is the collision course with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General C.Q. Brown, a former fighter pilot with command experience in the Pacific and the Middle East. So he was questioning him about his race. An Air Force general?
He was questioning him about his race. What the hell did his race have to do with it?
Nothing. If you're a general, you made it on your intelligence and your ability, in a lot of areas. It had nothing to do with race. He's such a jerk.
Especially for someone who'd been a fighter pilot for so many years.
Yeah.
It seems outrageous.
Very outrageous.
Evelina says most, granted not all, seem like a younger personnel crowd. Yeah, I think they are younger, and in some ways, I think they're far less qualified. Evelina says because Jill Stein was the only peace candidate. Yeah, well, Cornel West was a peace candidate too, wasn't he?
Yes.
And Lana says Trump doesn't want Claudia de la Cruz was a peace candidate, wasn't she?
That's true, yes.
And Lana says Trump doesn't want anyone who argues with him. The truth is not important. That's true. But I think for us all, the truth is very important because if Trump should make a decision to go in for 100% support of Israel, we're going to lose, the war with Iran, and it's going to be costly for us. Very costly.
And this is stupid. It says Hegseth, if confirmed by the U.S. Senate, could make good on Trump's campaign promises to rid the U.S. military of generals who he accuses of pursuing progressive policies on diversity in the ranks that conservatives have rallied against.
Yeah, but this is ridiculous.
This is a serious job.
We need somebody who's Secretary of Defense who's going to inform the president of what our capability is to fight wars.
Right. It's not about woke or anything else.
Yeah, we need someone who's going to be able to explain that to the president. Someone like a Doug McGregor is perfectly qualified for that kind of job. And he also has a reputation for telling the truth. That's the kind of advisor that Trump needs as Secretary of Defense. Anyway, Lana says Teresa was hoping that Thomas Massey was going to involve somewhere in Trump's lineup. She likes him. I don't know why. She probably likes him because of his independence, but I think he's much more valuable to us, not in Trump's administration, but staying in the Congress where he can fight Trump. And he won't be afraid to do that. I like him. I like him because he's very independent and because he has his own values and he always stands up for those values. I mean, I don't like his extreme conservatism in very many ways, but I respect his integrity. He's a person of integrity. That's why I like him. He won't be afraid to vote against Trump. Unfortunately, he's not in the Senate, so he won't have anything to do with the confirmation of these people. Okay, so it's late. Okay, it's 11:33. We've been here for 2.5 hours. I think this was a very good show.
I think so too. And I'm just shaking my head. These are disastrous choices.
They are disastrous choices, especially if the goal is to make peace. Okay,
That is that is what the MAGA crowd is saying. They're furious, and those that support RFK Jr. are furious.
yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure RFK Jr., if he wanted the job, would have been a better choice. Uh, well, I don't know if I should say for Secretary of State, but maybe even for Secretary of State.
And I
Certainly,
know he was warning Trump. Also, Trump's firstborn son was warning him too. They didn't like the choices that were being made. They wanted more peace, peaceful candidates. They wanted to get away from the neocon stuff.
yeah. Who is Trump's firstborn son? Is that Eric?
No, oh yeah, Don Jr.
So Don Jr. is his firstborn son?
Yes.
I somehow had the impression that Eric was his firstborn son.
Now Eric's he's was born after what? No, never mind. No, he wasn't.
Okay. So Don Jr. I've noticed Don Jr. seems to have been getting far more influential
Hmm.
with his father of late. But he's the person responsible for the choice of J.D. Vance as the vice presidential candidate,
Mm.
okay, which I don't think was really a help to Trump, okay, in the campaign. I know Trump won, but I think it was in spite of J.D. Vance and not
Right.
because of him.
Yeah, well, they kind of thought of J.D. Vance because of making inroads in the middle of the country with the working class.
Okay, so Lana asks, what was your take on Chris Murphy, Connecticut, calling out the Dem loss? So I can answer that question. It'll probably take a few minutes. Let me go to my Twitter here. Okay, the way I answered it is, uh, okay, I took all 10, okay, of the tweets of Chris Murphy, and I quote tweeted them all. So let me find the quote tweets. I quote tweeted all 10 of them. And here's what I said. I think I'm just going to share this because it's probably easier to present it. Share the screen. And here we are. So the first one by Chris Murphy was that was a cataclysm. Electoral map wipeout. Senate D practical ceiling is now 52 seats. Ours is 62. Time to rebuild. Up to the left. And then Chris said, we are out of touch with the crisis of meaning, purpose, fueling of MAGA. We refuse to pick big fights. Our tent is too small. One, okay, some early thoughts. And my reply to that was, let's see. My reply to that was, good thoughts. Will you stick with them or will you just knuckle under to the kind of thinking offered by Jamie Harrison, the man who spent $120 million to lose to Lindsey Graham by 60% to 40%, and Nancy Pelosi, who needs to take her stock portfolio and herself back to San Francisco. So that was my reply to his first tweet. His second tweet in his thread said, the left has never fully grappled with the wreckage of 50 years of neoliberalism, which has left legions of Americans adrift as local places are hollowed out, a rapacious profit-seeking cannibalizes the common good, and unchecked new technology separates and isolates us. And I asked then, in response to his number 2 tweet, I had a number 2 tweet, does that mean you'll now introduce the legislation for a federal job guarantee at a county-based CPI-adjusted living wage across the country with a median living wage of $25 an hour? So I asked him that question. So his number 3 tweet was, the things that mattered are disappointing. We spend half as much time with friends as a generation ago. Hard work no longer guarantees economic mobility. Institutions like churches are delegitimized. Place-based identity evaporates as we all become, quote, global citizens, unquote. And 3, I said, I couldn't agree more, Chris. These are the wages of neoliberalism. So next, Chris said, the left skips past the way people are feeling, alone, impotent, overwhelmed, and straight to uninspiring solutions, more roads, bulk drug purchasing, that do little to actually upset the status quo of who has power and who doesn't. So in reply to that, which was his number 4 tweet, I said, wow, Chris, you are really on a roll. I really started appreciating him then, I guess, in that tweet.
Mm-hmm.
So his number 5 tweet, does racism explain part of the attraction of the right's nativism? Of course, but mass deportation is a terrible response to Americans' real sense they're helpless in the face of global forces like increased migration. The left largely ignores this pain. And number 5, I said, well done. Let's address the pain at last. Then his number 6, we don't listen enough. We tell people what's good for them. And when progressives like Bernie aggressively go after the elites that hold people down, they are shunned as dangerous populists. Why? Maybe because true economic populism is bad for our high income the base, said Chris. And I said in response to that, let me get that up. 6. You've got your finger on it now. Are you ready to lead a national dump the corruption campaign? So I said that. So as number 7, he said, meanwhile, men tumble into a different kind of identity crisis as the patriarchy, society's primary organizing paradigm for centuries, rightly crashes. The right pushes an alluring dial back. The left says, quote, get over it, unquote, again, a refusal to listen / offer responsible solutions. So as number 7, I said, please offer some, quote, responsible solutions, unquote. I would sincerely like to see him offer some. Okay. Anyway, number 8, he said, we cannot be afraid of fights, especially with the economic elites who have profited off neoliberalism. The right regularly picks fights with elites, Hollywood, higher ed, etc., Democrats, e.g., the Harris campaign, are tepid in our fights with billionaires and corporations. And to that I said, 8, how can you fight the people who are funding your campaigns? Only by following the rule below in the context of a hashtag dump the corruption campaign. And I attached, of course, the meme containing the rule. Vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corps, individuals, PACs, or party committees, and who repudiate all super PAC support. And then there was his number 9 tweet, real economic populism should be our tent pole. But here's the thing, then you need to let people into the tent who aren't 100% on board with us on every social and cultural issue or issues like guns, okay, or climate. And I said in reply to that, number 9, right you are. And number 10, Chris said, those are hard things for the left. A firm break, okay, with neoliberalism. Listen to poor and rural people, men in crisis, don't decide for them, pick fights, embrace populism, build a big tent, be less judgmental. But we are beyond the small fixes, said Chris. And I said in response to that, I think this one might really hurt. Does that mean you'll run for president in 2028 based on Bernie's 2020 platform? So that was my last answer to the 10-part tweet storm, okay, of Chris Murphy. So I don't know whether I got any kudos for that. My notifications do not yet show that a lot of attention was paid to that particular tweet storm of mine. Okay, I did get a few comments on it, but not too many yet. I'm waiting for more. So if you want to go back in and support me, Lana, you're welcome to do that. So there were some more comments here. Lana says, ooh, good question, re-job guarantee. And then Lana says that Asich guy on the right of your screen is worth following. He is an MMTR. Okay. His name is Ashish Barua. And Lana says, you gave some good answers. And she says, Cenk doesn't think he will stick to what he is saying here. Still glad he sent it. Time will tell. And Lana said, yes, I didn't realize you had replied. I did. I replied this morning at some length, actually, before I did anything else for the day. So,
You know, something interesting here. Not that it matters, but you just raises questions about him, about Hegseth. It says that his first wife, Meredith Schwartz, he was married 2004 to 2009, and then Samantha Hegseth, he's married 2010 to 2017. So now he's on his third wife, Jennifer Rochette, married 2019, and he's 44 years old. So you wonder,
okay, his first wife, if her name is Meredith Schwartz, okay, that's a Jewish name.
yes.
So that's of some interest, I think, for an evangelical Christian.
Let me see. Okay, here it's coming up here. Let me see.
Hmm.
Because I know he's got 7 kids.
He's got, you mean, 7 kids from his 3 wives.
Probably. I'd have to read more into it. It says here the 44-year-old was an infantry captain in the Army National Guard and served overseas. In Iraq, Afghanistan, Guantanamo Bay, and Cuba.
Hmm. So he was an infantry captain. So that was the highest rank that he attained.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Hegeseth and Deering share 3 children, Gunnar, Bonnie, and Rex. Just 3 kids with one of the wives. And then Hegeseth and Rorschach had an extramarital relationship while he was married to Deering. So much for his, Rorschach welcomed their daughter in 2017. They got married in 2019. Hegeseth is a father to Rorschach's 3 children from her first marriage, Kenzie, Jackson, and Luke. I guess, so much, talks about being this evangelical and biblical and all this other stuff.
Yeah, well, he's biblical, all right.
Crazy stuff.
I wonder if they're going to put me on Fox and Friends for saying that.
I know, right?
I would probably add a sense of humor to that show,
Yeah.
but they might not like my humor. Lana says he is as biblical as Trump, apparently. Lana says, be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm trying to see if it says anything about. His first wife was Meredith Schwartz, but it doesn't say anything about her religion.
Yeah. Okay, but Schwartz can be a Jewish name.
It can be, and it's also what, German as well.
Yes. Yes, it's German for black. In
Okay.
other words, the translation into English is black.
Okay. That's crazy what they say about him. Pete Hegseth is a husband, father, patriot, and Christian. Look at that. He's a patriot
He's,
and a
he,
Christian.
He's a husband 3 times.
Yes.
He's a father 7 times.
Yes. A patriot and a Christian. Oh God.
Yes, and he's a Christian throughout it all.
Yeah. Craziness.
Evelina Pont asks whether Trump converted. Okay. Well, as far as I know, Trump was never married to a Jewish woman.
Well, from what I understand, Ivanka wanted him to convert to Judaism and hooked him up with some rabbi that, I guess, to help him along the way or to talk with him because she's, said how um, her marriage and just her life with being practicing Judaism, it's been so positive. It's been positive, and she just recommended it to her father and was pushing her father. Ivanka, yeah.
All right. So Lana says, I work with a lady named Schwartz. We used to tease her that she was one letter away from being Jewish. And also says, Trump's daughter converted for her husband.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, she did. How many children do they have?
I believe they have, what, three?
Oh, really? Are they all daughters?
No. I'm trying to.
Okay. The firstborn was a daughter, right?
Yeah, and I'm thinking the other.
Or a
Oh,
granddaughter.
yeah, the first one, yes. We'd have to look that up because I think it's, she has the girl. Who did she say? Well, thank you. Okay. Um, Let me look up. 'Cause I know the daughter, and there's a son, but I'm not sure if it's two boys. Let me see.
Hmm. Okay, I think we're rapidly approaching 3 hours.
Okay, three children.
As well,
Well,
thank you for going over your tweet responses.
okay, I was right. The first one, Arabella. The second is Joseph Frederick, and the third is Theodore James.
So one daughter and 2 sons.
Yes.
Okay, Joseph and Frederick, I think, were Fred Trump, his father, was Frederick, right?
Yeah, so Joseph Frederick, and then the last one is Theodore James.
Theodore James. I wonder who he's named after.
Mm,
He may be named after someone in Jared's family.
yeah.
It's interesting. Hmm. Okay, I think we can probably say goodnight now, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think we talked about enough. Got into some family business stuff.
Yeah. You're not only Trump family business, but Hegseth family business.
Oh, God, and crazy.
God, this is really going to be something.
I mean, it would be ridiculous if the Senate confirmed Hegseth.
It would be ridiculous. They've only got a margin. Uh, they're 53 to 47. They could still confirm 50-50 if they have uh, 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 3 defections. But if they have 4 defections, then he couldn't be confirmed.
He doesn't have the experience, and I just can't even see Republicans going along with it.
Yeah, he clearly doesn't have the experience. Yeah, so Lana asks, Fred was Trump's father? Yes, Fred was notorious for being Trump's father. And then she says good night. And then she says, inquiring minds need to know. And then she says, never heard of this Hegseth guy. And Evelina says, Hex Seth. Laugh out loud. Yeah, yeah. That is
Oh,
fun.
God. Oh, we'll see what tomorrow's got to bring.
Okay, so thanks everybody for coming. This was a reasonably attended stream. Okay, and the discussion was good.
Hmm.
So thank you all very much. We certainly enjoyed it, even though it was a long stream.
Yes, we did. We
And
need this. We need this to go over stuff. It's just too much.
yes, and we will see you later in the week.
Hmm.
I guess we got to do everything we wanted to do tonight, so it was pretty good. That part of it went well.
Yes.
But over the next few days, there's going to be a storm of comments on Hegseth and probably little Marco also.
Unbelievable stuff. I'll be on tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, what do you think you'll cover now?
We'll see. We'll see what the day brings.
Okay, it's too early to say, right?
Yes. The times we live in right now, it's too early to say.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
it is too early to say. It's so. Yeah, I have to say, I keep waiting for the Iranian attack.
Oh, me too.
I know it's going to happen, but I really think it could be a game changer.
Yes, I really think it's needed because with all these appointments.
Yeah, I think these appointments need a good lesson,
Yes.
and I think there would be nothing like a very severe and successful, Iranian attack followed by an Israeli retaliation
Hmm.
that came up against the air defense system of the Iranians, and that failed.
Hmm.
I think that would be a real learning experience for the idiots that Trump wants to appoint.
And they're all just, you got the far right nut jobs in Israel, with the far right appointees here in the U.S. I mean, they're all part of the same mentality. This craziness.
Yeah, I'm sure it's making Smutrich and Ben Gvir dance around
Yeah.
their mulberry bushes or whatever it is they dance around.
Yeah, we'll probably be hearing more about with the red heifers again and all that's nonsense.
Yeah, Solana asks, you mean an attack on Israel, not the U.S.? Yes. Okay, I mean an attack on Israel. The attack the Iranians have been promising now, okay, since October 26th.
And they said they were going to wait till after the election.
Yes. Well, it's after the election, and also it's after the announcements of these crazy people to run foreign policy.
It's nuts.
It would be appropriate for the Iranians to answer as if to say, well, if you want to play the game that way,
Hmm.
here's the consequence.
Exactly. Because these nut jobs, they don't recognize Palestine. You have, what's his name, Mike Huckabee, using the terms Judea and Samaria, that there's no West Bank,
Oh
that
my!
that, that they're not settlements, they're just communities.
My God, I forgot about Mike Huckabee. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm not going to go back. I'm going to say good night.
Yes, good night, everybody. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night. Okay, good
And
night, Dee, and thank you very much for coming on board tonight.
oh, you're welcome. It's a good show. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a good show. I enjoyed it.
Yes, me too.
Okay, so I'm going to end this, end the stream.
Okay.